He kissed his boss, right there on stage in front of everyone. The cameras flashed, the audience went silent. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "What did you just do?" she asked, her voice trembling between shock and anger. But what no one knew, what even she didn't know, was that the kiss she thought was disrespectful had just saved her life. This is the story of Tony, the poor gateman who risked everything in a single moment and changed both their destinies forever. Before we begin, let me warn you, this story will hold your breath, twist your heart, and keep you on the edge of your seat. By the end, you'll understand everything. So if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Share this story with your friends, your family, and everyone who loves stories that hit deep. Grab your popcorn, sit tight, and let's step into the world of Tony's unforgettable story. Tony's story began with struggle. He was once a computer scientist, bright, hardworking, full of dreams. He believed life would reward his effort. But one year his company downsized and he lost his job. He thought it would be temporary. It wasn't. Months turned into a year. Savings disappeared. His friends stopped answering his calls. Even his family began to drift away. Every morning, Tony put on a worn-out shirt, held a brown file filled with certificates, and walked through the city under the scorching sun. He knocked on every office door he could find. "Please, sir, I'm a graduate. I can work with computers, data, anything." But everywhere he went, he heard the same words. "We'll get back to you." No one ever did. That evening, when he returned home exhausted, he saw his belongings scattered outside. The old landlady stood at the door, her hands on her waist, her voice full of venom. "Tony, I've had enough of your stories. You've been jobless for months. You owe me 3 months' rent. Leave my house now." He dropped to his knees. "Please, madam, give me 1 more month. I'll pay everything, I promise." She scoffed. "Promise? You've been promising since last year. Go and promise the street." She threw his last bag out and slammed the door. Tony sat outside, surrounded by his things, tears mixing with the dust on his face. That night he found shelter under a rusted shed beside a shop. Mosquitoes bit him, but he couldn't sleep. He looked up at the dark sky and whispered, "God, if I'm still your son, don't let me die like this." Around midnight, his phone rang. He almost ignored it, thinking it was a wrong number. "Hello?" he said weakly. A woman's voice replied, "Is this Tony?" "Yes." "Your application has been accepted. You can start work tomorrow." He sat up immediately. Thank you so much. Which company is this?" The voice hesitated for a second. "The gateman role." Tony froze. A gateman? After all his years in school? After all his suffering? He looked down at his hands and sighed. Pride fought hunger in his chest, but hunger won. "Yes, ma'am, I'll be there," he said quietly. The next morning he followed the address. It led to a mansion so big it felt like a dream. Marble walls, silver gates, a fountain that sang softly in the front yard. He stood there in awe. Then a red car drove in. A woman stepped out, tall, elegant, confident, wearing a red suit and dark glasses. Her tone was sharp and commanding. "What are you staring at? Close the gate." Tony quickly obeyed, fumbling with the locks. "Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry, ma'am." She turned and pointed to a small hut by the fence. "That's your house. Keep the gate clean, and don't ever keep me waiting." Then she walked away. Inside the hut was a thin mat, a small table, and dust everywhere. Tony sat down and stared at the cracked wall. "A house is better than the street," he muttered, forcing a smile. He decided to stay grateful. Madame Remy, his boss, was a rich woman, young, beautiful, and very proud. She ran her own company, drove expensive cars, and dressed like power itself. But behind her success was a man, her boyfriend, Kelly. Handsome, charming, lazy. He lived in her house, spent her money, and played video games all day. Tony saw it all, but said nothing. He simply did his work. Every morning, he woke up before sunrise, swept the compound, cleaned the gate, washed cars, carried groceries, and stood by the gate like a statue. If Kelly wanted something, he shouted. If Madam wanted something, she snapped. Tony never argued, he simply nodded. He told himself, a bad day with a job is better than a good day with hunger. One Sunday morning, Madame Remy came out dressed in a beautiful gown. Kelly followed behind her, wearing sunglasses and holding car keys. "Tony," she shouted, "open the gate, we're late." Tony ran to open it. Kelly frowned. "Next time, use your brain and open it before we get there." They drove away laughing. Tony closed the gate slowly and whispered, "God, give me strength." Weeks passed, months rolled by. Then one morning, a storm hit Madame Remy's peace. She sat in her office, eyes wide, staring at her laptop. Kelly, come here. My account. 300,000 is missing. Kelly walked over casually, pretending to care. Relax, my love. Maybe it's a system error. But the same thing happened again and again. Money kept vanishing. She called accountants, hired data analysts, and even brought in professionals. None could solve it. One afternoon, Tony came in carrying groceries. He paused when he heard Madame Remy talking on the phone. Please, check the link I sent. Someone's draining my money. I'm desperate. He stood quietly, thinking. He knew what was happening. He understood the digital traces, the data patterns. He had once done this kind of work, but he was a gateman now. Who would listen to him? Still, he tried. Madam, he said softly, if I could just take a look, I might help. Kelly's voice cut through the air. You? A gateman? Are you insane? Remy glared. Who asked you to talk? Tony bowed. I'm sorry, ma'am. Kelly laughed mockingly. A gateman wants to solve what experts can't? Foolish man. Tony walked out quietly, but inside, something in him was burning. That night, the house was silent. Madame Remy sat by herself, staring at the screen that showed her company's empty account. Kelly was asleep on the couch, snoring. She thought about the poor gateman who had offered help. Maybe, she thought, he knew something. What did she have to lose? She stood up, grabbed her laptop, and walked to the small hut by the gate. Tony sat on a stool, reading an old book under the dim bulb. When he saw her, he jumped up. Madam, good evening. Tony, she said, I need your help. He blinked, confused. Me? Yes, you said you could fix it. Can you try? Tony smiled faintly. I'll try my best. He opened the laptop. Lines of code filled the screen. He worked fast, tracing patterns, following trails, eyes focused, fingers flying. The air was thick with tension. Then suddenly, Kelly barged in. What's going on here? His eyes burned with anger. You gave him your laptop? Are you out of your mind? All your private details are in there. Tony froze. That phrase, private details. He stared at Kelly, then at the screen. Private details. It made sense. The theft wasn't from outside. It was from within. Tony's hands moved faster. His program flashed green. Suddenly, numbers rolled back into the account. Madame Remy gasped. My money. It's back. She turned to him, tears in her eyes, and hugged him. Thank you, Tony. You saved my life. Kelly stood at the door, jaw clenched, fists tight. His secret had been exposed. But Tony didn't know how far jealousy could go. A week later, Madame Remy announced her company's grand launch. This time, she told Kelly, proudly, I'll publicly thank Tony. Everyone must know he saved us. Kelly forced a smile. Of course, my love. But inside, rage consumed him. That night, he met with a man in a dark corner. You'll get your money, he said coldly. Make sure she doesn't walk off that stage alive. The next morning, Tony woke up before dawn. He looked in the cracked mirror of his tiny room, straightened his shirt, and smiled. Today, they'll see me, he whispered. No one will ever call me useless again. The event hall glittered with lights and cameras. Reporters, investors, guests, everyone was there. Madame Remy looked stunning in a silver gown. She took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, today I present the man who saved this company, Tony. The audience clapped and cheered. Tony rose from his seat, heart racing. But as he climbed the stairs, something caught his eye, a small red dot glowing on his chest. His stomach dropped. In that instant, he realized what was happening. Without thinking, he ran forward, grabbed her face, and kissed her cheek. The audience gasped. Cameras flashed wildly. Everyone was shocked, but the assassin on the balcony lost his target. The bullet never fired. Tony's reckless act had blocked the shot. Tony, Remy yelled, pushing him away. What do you think you're doing? Before he could speak, a furious voice erupted from the side of the hall. It was Kelly. If you missed her, shoot him too. The crowd froze. People turned. Someone whispered, did he just say shoot? The whispers turned to noise. Phones came out, reporters aimed their cameras, security rushed forward. Within minutes, the hall descended into chaos. Kelly tried to escape, but guards caught him. The crowd screamed in disbelief as police arrived. Everything had been caught on camera. His plan, his words, his guilt. As Kelly was dragged away, Remy trembled. She turned to Tony, tears streaming down her face. You saved my life, she said quietly. He smiled faintly. I only did what I had to, ma'am. Then, in front of everyone, she held up his hand. From this day, Tony is no longer a gateman. He is the chief of staff. The hall erupted with applause. Cameras flashed. Investors cheered. For the first time, Tony stood tall, not as a servant, but as a savior. Kelly's name disappeared from society. His pride was buried with his betrayal. And Tony, the man who once slept under a shed, mocked and homeless, rose to become a symbol of faith, humility, and courage. Every evening, Tony still stood by the mansion gate, not as a guard anymore, but as a reminder of how far he had come. Sometimes, when the wind was quiet, he looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you for turning shame into grace." Because sometimes the very act that looks foolish to the world is the act that saves your life. And sometimes, the person you despise the most is the one sent to protect you. Never look down on anyone, because every soul has a purpose and every story has a moment of redemption. If this story touched you, share it. Someone out there needs to hear it. Because greatness often wears humble shoes.